The rain fell in soft streaks across the windshield as Sarah drove down the quiet suburban road. Her son Ethan sat in the back seat, his small face pressed against the cool glass, watching the blurred lights outside turn into glowing rivers of color. The wipers swished back and forth, filling the silence with a steady rhythm. It was the kind of silence that Sarah had grown used to, the kind that made her feel both safe and lonely at the same time. She tightened her hands on the steering wheel. Her life had become predictable, every day a mirror of the last. School drop-offs, work, grocery runs. Homework, dinner, bedtime, repeat. It wasn't bad. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't alive either. She often told herself that keeping things steady was the best she could do for her son. Stability was love. She believed that. Or at least she wanted to. Ethan shifted in his seat, his voice soft but clear. "Mom, do you ever miss Dad?" The words dropped like a stone into still water, rippling through her chest. She felt her throat tighten as the question filled the small space of the car. Sarah's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, and she saw her son's gaze fixed on her. Honest, direct, innocent yet far too aware for his age. "Yes," she whispered, almost afraid to admit it out loud. "I miss him every single day." Her late husband, David, had been gone for almost 4 years now. A sudden heart attack. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. One moment they had been laughing about something trivial, and the next, life had broken in two. She had shielded Ethan from most of that pain. Or at least she thought she had. They rarely spoke about David anymore, as if silence was easier than reopening a wound. But Ethan was not done. He leaned forward, his small hands clutching the back of her seat. His voice was gentle, but the truth in it cut sharper than anything she could have prepared for. "But Mum, I think you don't just miss Dad. I think you miss love." Her heart stopped for a beat. Her breath caught, and for a second she almost swerved the car. The wipers kept their steady rhythm, but everything else inside her came to a halt. She wanted to respond, to say something wise or comforting, but nothing came. Her son had spoken a truth she had buried so deeply that she pretended it wasn't there. She missed David. Yes, but more than that. She missed the feeling of being held, of being cared for, of being seen by someone who loved her completely. The car rolled forward under the glow of streetlights, and Sarah felt tears press at the corners of her eyes. She bit her lip to hold them back, not wanting Ethan to see her break. But inside, something cracked open, and all the feelings she had locked away began to spill out. She remembered nights when David used to sit beside her, their hands tangled together on the couch while they laughed at some silly movie. She remembered the warmth of his voice when he called her name, the way he'd make plans for the future like they had all the time in the world. And then she remembered the hospital room, the coldness of his hand, the way her knees nearly gave out when the doctor shook his head. Ethan's words kept echoing, not cruelly, not accusing, but as if he had simply seen what she couldn't admit. He was a child, yet he carried a wisdom she couldn't ignore. He had noticed the loneliness in her. Maybe even before she noticed it herself. Sarah pulled into their driveway, the headlights cutting across the small lawn. She parked, but she didn't move. Her hands stayed on the wheel, gripping tightly as if letting go would mean falling apart. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward again. His voice was soft, but his words filled the silence. "It's okay to miss love, Mom. Dad would want you to be happy." She turned then, finally meeting his eyes. His innocence didn't make the truth less powerful. It made it more, for the first time in years. She felt seen not just as Ethan's mother, not just as a widow, but as a woman with a heart still beating inside her chest. They went inside, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sarah set down her bag and moved through the rooms like she always did. But everything felt different. Her son's voice followed her everywhere. It played in her head as she washed the dishes, as she tucked Ethan into bed, as she sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space beside her on the couch. She missed David, but her son was right. She missed more than just him. She missed the feeling of waking up to someone's arms, the warmth of a kiss on her forehead before she even opened her eyes, the laughter in the kitchen while they burned breakfast together on Sunday mornings. She missed being loved, and she missed loving in return. The night stretched long, and Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the rain, wondering how her son had managed to say in one sentence what she couldn't admit in years. The truth was heavy, but it was also freeing. For the first time in a long time, she let herself feel it fully. Not pushing it down, not running from it. And as she sat there, she realized something. Ethan hadn't asked the question to hurt her. He had asked because he saw her. He loved her enough to want her happy. And maybe, just maybe, it was time she allowed herself to believe she could be. The night ended with Sarah still sitting there, a quiet tear rolling down her cheek. But this time it wasn't only grief. It was also a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever. The faint, trembling hope that love, in some shape, might one day find her again. The night after Ethan spoke those words in the car stretched long for Sarah. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment, every syllable like a record stuck in place. It wasn't just the question that unsettled her. It was the truth behind it. She had convinced herself she was fine, that her routine was enough. But now the walls she built around her heart felt thinner, fragile. Morning came too quickly. The alarm buzzed, and she forced herself up, making breakfast for Ethan, pouring coffee she barely touched, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Something had shifted. She saw her reflection in the kitchen window and for the first time in years admitted she looked tired. Not just physically, but in her soul. When she dropped Ethan off at school, she sat in the car for a long time before driving away. She watched other parents laugh, some couples walking hand in hand. She used to have that. She used to be part of that world. Now she was an outsider looking in. Ethan's words still echoed, reminding her that life wasn't just about surviving. It was about living. The week went on, and Sarah tried to shake the feeling. She threw herself into work, into chores, into everything that kept her busy. But when night came, and the house grew quiet, the loneliness seeped in like cold air through a crack. She would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the chair that once belonged to David, imagining how his laughter used to fill the space. She missed him deeply, but she also missed herself, the woman who once knew how to love without fear. Friday afternoon arrived with grey skies, and Sarah parked outside Ethan's school. The bell rang. Children poured out, laughter filling the air. As she scanned the crowd, her eyes caught on a tall figure walking across the lot. At first she didn't recognize him, but then he turned, and her heart gave a small, startled jump. Michael. He had been David's friend, not a best friend, but close enough to share old stories and summer barbecues. She hadn't seen him in years. He had moved away after college, built his life elsewhere. But now here he was, looking older, broader in the shoulders. His smile just as warm as she remembered. Their eyes met. And in that second, the noise of the schoolyard seemed to fade. Michael gave a small wave and walked over. "Sarah, it's been so long." She blinked, trying to gather her thoughts. "Michael, wow. I didn't know you were back in town." "I moved back a few months ago," he said. His voice calm, familiar, wanted to be closer to family. "I didn't expect to run into you here." Ethan ran up, holding his backpack, and Michael's face softened when he saw him. "You've grown so much," he said kindly. Ethan gave a shy smile. But Sarah noticed how comfortable he seemed with Michael right away. They talked for a few minutes, just small details. How long he'd been back, what he was doing now, how quickly the years had passed. But beneath the casual words was something heavier. The quiet recognition that time hadn't erased their shared history. Sarah found herself smiling more than she had in a long while. And that scared her. Because it felt good. Too good. When Michael left, he gave her a gentle smile. "It was really nice seeing you again, Sarah." And for a moment, she wondered what her life might look like if conversations like this weren't rare. But a part of her days, that night, she thought about him, not in a reckless way, but in a way that reminded her she was still a woman who could feel something stir inside her. It was frightening and comforting all at once. Over the next week, Michael appeared again. Not by chance this time, but in small ways that felt natural. He waved at school pickup, offered to help when her car struggled to start. Even stopped by once with a toolbox to fix the leaky faucet she had been ignoring for months. Sarah wanted to say no, to keep her distance. But the truth was she didn't. She liked the company, the kindness, the way he spoke to Ethan with patience and warmth. One evening, as Michael tightened the faucet handle, Ethan leaned against the counter watching him, and then asked, "Were you friends with my dad?" Michael paused, setting the wrench down. His expression softened. "Yes, I was," he said. "Your dad was a good man. One of the best I knew." Ethan smiled faintly. "Mum misses him." Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Michael looked at her, not with pity, but with understanding. And in his eyes she saw something rare. Someone who saw her not just as a widow, not just as a mother, but as Sarah. A woman who once had dreams and laughter of her own. Later that night, when Ethan was asleep, Sarah stood in the kitchen staring at the faucet Michael had fixed. It wasn't just a faucet anymore. It was a reminder that life could still surprise her. That healing didn't mean forgetting, the days kept moving. And Sarah found herself waiting for those moments when Michael would show up. His presence didn't erase the past, but it made the present feel lighter. He didn't push, didn't demand. He simply showed up with kindness, and that alone felt like a gift. One evening, after picking up Ethan, she saw Michael again, this time holding a bag of groceries. He smiled as if he had been expecting her. "You always look like you're carrying the weight of the world." "Sarah," he said, half teasing, half concerned. She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in so long it startled her. "Maybe I am," she admitted. He studied her face for a moment, then said gently, "You don't have to carry it all alone." The words lingered, stirring something deep in her chest. Later, at home, she couldn't stop thinking about them. She had been carrying everything alone for so long, the grief, the responsibilities, the silence. And now, for the first time, there was the faint possibility of not being alone forever. That weekend, Sarah took Ethan to the park. The sun broke through the clouds. Children ran across the grass, and the air smelled of early spring as she watched Ethan play. She spotted Michael sitting on a bench nearby, a book in his hands. When he saw her, he waved, and she found herself walking over, drawn by something she couldn't name. They talked for over an hour, about books, about life, about the years that had passed. Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in a long time. She told him about the struggles, the nights of loneliness, the fear of moving forward. Michael listened without judgment, his presence steady and kind when Ethan ran back, laughing, holding a small flower he had picked. Michael looked at Sarah with a softness that made her chest ache. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was something else. Something she hadn't felt since David. A spark. A possibility. A quiet reminder that her heart still knew how to beat faster. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table long after Ethan had gone to bed. She thought about everything. Her husband's memory. Her son's truth. Michael's smile. She felt pulled in two directions. Part of her afraid of betraying the past. Another part whispering that life wasn't meant to be only shadows. For the first time since David's passing, Sarah allowed herself to think about the future not with dread, but with a fragile sense of hope. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't certainty, but it was something. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks moved quickly, and Sarah found herself noticing the change in her life. It wasn't dramatic. Not the kind of change you could measure by a single event. It was subtle, quiet, but steady, like sunlight slowly breaking through heavy clouds. And at the center of it was Michael. He didn't overwhelm her. He didn't push her into anything she wasn't ready for. Instead, he was simply there. He fixed the things around the house she had learned to ignore. He made small jokes that made Ethan laugh until his cheeks hurt. He carried bags when she looked tired. He listened when she spoke, and when she fell silent. He didn't rush to fill the quiet. He let her breathe. Ethan noticed first, of course, one evening at dinner. He pushed his plate aside and looked at his mother with those wise, unguarded eyes. "Mom, I think Dad would want you to smile again." The words hit Sarah like a wave. She blinked quickly, her throat tightening, and for a moment she thought she might cry. But instead she forced a small smile. "Do you really think so?" Ethan nodded firmly. "Yes, because when you smile, it makes everything feel better." Sarah glanced at Michael's name in her phone later that night, her son's words still echoing. She didn't call him, but she thought about him. About the ease he brought into her life. About the possibility of letting her heart open again. Saturday came with crisp air and a pale autumn sky. Michael had invited them to the lake. Ethan begged to go. And though Sarah hesitated, she agreed. They packed snacks, a blanket, and drove out to the quiet water's edge. The lake shimmered under the cool light, trees bending over it as though protecting its stillness. Ethan ran ahead, his laughter echoing as he searched for flat stones to skip across the water. Sarah followed slowly, her arms wrapped around herself. Feeling the nervous rhythm of her own heartbeat, Michael stood by the water's edge, hands in his pockets, his eyes warm when they met hers. "You came," he said simply, and in those two words was a weight of gratitude. Sarah nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Ethan wouldn't let me say no." They both laughed softly. But the sound carried more than humor, it carried relief. A shared awareness of how fragile and real this moment was. They watched Ethan skip stones, cheering when one managed to bounce across the water more than twice. The air smelled of leaves and pine. And Sarah realized how long it had been since she'd been outside like this, just enjoying the simple act of being present. Michael turned toward her, his voice quiet. "I know this isn't easy for you, Sarah. I don't want you to feel like you have to be anything you're not." She met his eyes, searching for the right words. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice trembling with honesty. "It feels like moving forward means letting go of everything behind me. And I don't know if I can." Michael's expression softened, his tone steady. "You don't have to let go of the past. You don't have to stop loving David. That love is part of you, part of who you are. I'm not here to replace it. I'm here to remind you that your heart can still breathe." Sarah's eyes stung with tears. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together, afraid of what it meant to even consider opening that door. But when she looked back at Michael, she saw no pressure, only patience. only the quiet promise of someone willing to walk beside her. Not ahead of her, not behind her. Ethan's voice broke the moment. "Mom, you're smiling," he shouted from the shore. Holding up another stone, Sarah touched her lips, realizing her son was right. A small, unguarded smile had crept across her face without her noticing. It wasn't forced. It wasn't for show. It was real. They spent the afternoon by the lake, talking, laughing, sharing silence that didn't feel heavy. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, they packed up, Ethan asleep in the back seat by the time they reached home. Inside the house, Sarah set Ethan in bed, tucking him beneath the blankets. She lingered at his door, watching his steady breathing, his small hand curled against his cheek. Her son had carried so much wisdom for his age. His words had opened a door she thought would stay locked forever. When she came back downstairs, Michael was waiting by the door. He looked at her with the kind of patience that told her he would leave if she asked. He wasn't rushing her. He wasn't trying to take what wasn't his to take. Sarah walked closer, her heart pounding. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Michael asked, his voice quiet. "For being here. For not making this harder than it already is." He smiled. That same gentle smile that had always been his. "I'm just glad I get to be here, Sarah." For a moment, the air between them was charged, not with pressure, but with something fragile, something new. Sarah's hand brushed against his, almost by accident, but neither of them pulled away. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a promise carved in stone. But it was enough that night. When Sarah finally lay in bed, she thought about David, about the love they had shared, about the life they built. She would always carry him in her heart. But now she thought about Michael too, about the way he looked at her, as though she was more than her grief, as though she still had chapters left to write. The days that followed unfolded slowly. Sarah didn't rush, and Michael didn't let her. They built something quiet, a friendship laced with the possibility of more. Ethan's laughter filled the spaces that once felt empty. And for the first time in years, the house felt alive again. One evening, as Sarah watched Ethan fall asleep, she realized something. Love wasn't gone from her life. It had just changed shape. It lived in her son's honesty, in Michael's patience, in her own willingness to take one small step at a time. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she no longer feared it, because she wasn't walking it alone anymore. She had her son's courage, her husband's memory, and maybe, if she was brave enough to let it grow, the possibility of love waiting in the gentle eyes of a man who saw her for who she still was. That was enough. For now it was more than enough.